So I'm turning 30 this year, which I'm not that excited about. But on my last book-related video, I got a comment from one of you guys asking what books I wish I read at 20. And to be honest, I didn't really have a great answer, but I've been thinking about that actually for a couple weeks now. And I think I can give a little bit of a better answer, not necessarily in terms of books I wish I read when I was 20, but books I've read over my 20s that I think were worth reading and that I would recommend to someone else that's in their 20s, either in university or coming out of university, starting your career. I think like as a guy, I mean, probably for women too, but I have no experience as a woman. So I think your 20s can be quite stressful and difficult because I think a lot of guys struggle with the in-between stage of being young and having a lot of ambition and excitement for your future and where you can get to and what you can achieve, as well as frustration at the fact that you're not there yet. And if you're being honest with yourself, you have a really long ways to go. And I'm obviously coming at this from like a perspective of a CPA. My career is in finance and the problems that come along with that. But I think that probably a lot of it is pretty applicable to just about any person early in their career. So really what I want to do today is share 9 books with you that I've read since I was 20. I'm going to talk about where I was in my life and in my career when I read them, the impact they had on me, and then why I think it makes sense for you to read them if you're interested in doing that. So I have the list here and I'm just going to jump into it one by one and let's go. I think when you're a young guy, you have like so much ambition and all you want to do is basically spend your time like improving yourself and building your life. And I think a lot of guys end up turning to personal development and self-improvement content on the internet and books and whatever. And while I think I've grown away from that as I've matured, I was the exact same. And a number of these books on this list are personal development, self-help books that I did genuinely find useful. I think whether or not mainstream self-help in general is useful is probably a discussion for another video. But the first book on this list is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. This was a super popular book a number of years ago, and I read it when I was probably like 24 or 25 maybe. And the reason why I'm recommending it to you is because, like I said, the ambition that you feel as a young guy can be easily hijacked, I think, by hustle culture and like grinding and people telling you to like wake up at 5 a.m. and that can be alluring. Obviously not for everybody, but for myself, I know that I found the idea of forcing myself to wake up early and go to the gym or start studying early or whatever alluring, and tried it and ultimately failed because like what you learn in this book is the absolute fundamental importance of sleep on your well-being, on your ability to perform at your best. And it is not really an option to neglect that. If you do neglect that, you are going to pay the price, either in the immediate term, likely in the immediate term because your performance will be worse, but 100% in the long term, you will burn out. There will be many negative health side effects related to your lack of sleep and not getting the amount of sleep that you need, which is different for everybody. So one of the things that is discussed in this book actually is how everyone is different in terms of their natural sleep-wake cycle, time that they need to sleep, etc. And I am actually a morning person. Even on weekends, I generally wake up at like 6 a.m. or even earlier. It's just naturally when I like to do it. But that also means that I go to bed early too. I do prioritize my sleep. I make sure that I'm generally in bed before 10 p.m. And one of my superpowers is that I can just fall asleep super fast. So usually I don't have to relax too much before bed in order to fall asleep. But I have learned over the years that by prioritizing relaxation for at least an hour before bed, watching a TV show with my girlfriend or whatever, just helps a lot in terms of how low my heart rate gets overnight and in turn how good I feel the next day. So the whole point being in terms of this book is just that sleep is really damn important and it's not worth sacrificing for the things that you want to achieve in your waking hours. You will be better off in those things by prioritizing your sleep. In terms of being along the lines of making better decisions, the next book I would put on this list is I think probably also classified as a self-help book, but I don't really see it talked about anywhere, and it's called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. Annie Duke is a professional, or was a professional poker player, and the book is really about how to make decisions when you don't have all the facts. And what you'll learn as you go through life is that is basically every decision that you'll ever make. There is almost no situation where you have all the facts and it's a simple calculation to figure out the best choice. So I think the reason I want to recommend this book to you as something to read in your 20s is because the way she presents this idea of making decisions without all the facts is that really what we're doing whenever we make a big decision is we're just placing a bet on a future that we think is going to happen as a result of our decisions. So the outcome of that is that when you're trying to make a difficult decision, or when you're reflecting on your decision making of the past, it's important not to be judging your decision making based on the outcome. What you should be doing is reflecting on your decision making process based on the facts you had at the time. You didn't know the future and you didn't have all the information, so you can be forgiven if the outcome didn't pan out. The important thing when trying to learn from your mistakes is whether or not they were actually a mistake, or whether or not the randomness that exists in the world just produced an outcome that you had no control over. Okay, the next book on the list is Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. The reason why I'm suggesting this book is because in order to be successful in any field, you do need some level of mastery and specialization and a high level of skill that you can offer to an employer or an organization or a customer or something like that. And that is very true and good advice. I'm a CPA. I pursued specialization in accounting and in finance, and I'm very happy I did that. On a personal level though, I am someone who is like interested in everything. I can study whatever I wanted to study, and I think I would have had a pretty good time. For me, I always have this internal conflict of whether or not I should continue to deepen my expertise in the field that I already have a level of mastery in. Mastery is probably a strong word. I don't feel like a master, but I certainly have more expertise in the subject field than most people in an organization. So should I continue to specialize in that and get better at that? And that has a very direct and obvious payoff for me. Or should I follow my other interests, build skills in indirectly connected but maybe adjacent areas, or even topic areas that are far from what I deal with on an everyday basis? And this book just kind of puts into perspective the value of having skills in different areas and different fields, and how great ideas and geniuses often have experience and knowledge from very different domains that comes together to create a new idea that people with expertise in one field would never be able to think of without expertise in the other. And I think there's just a lot of truth to that. And as I've moved through my career, I've returned to that idea and found comfort in the idea that I'm allowed to pursue different skills that are maybe a little bit less common than someone would typically recommend to someone in my field. As well as I think it just sort of makes you a more interesting and well-rounded person in terms of having knowledge from a very wide range of fields. I think that gives you nuance and perspective and makes you more interesting to talk to when you're at social events and you're networking and doing that type of thing. So I don't know if everyone has to read this book, but I think if you struggle with finding a balance between going deeper on a subject and becoming a true expert, or branching into other topics and developing a less deep but still strong foundation in that other topic, that both are fine and there is a role for people with range and a role for people with expertise. Okay, and then the last self-help book on this list is one that you've probably heard of. It's very famous. It's called Deep Work by Cal Newport. It is essentially an argument against the distracted world that we all live in, and the value of putting those distractions away, getting locked in, as the kids say, and just being like super focused. God, I'm old, man. I'm old now. It's so lame. Anyway, just getting like super focused on your work for like 2, 3, even 4 hours at a time, and just truly creating value out of that moment. And that is an imperative thing to have in your career. You simply cannot get done the things that you need to get done without being able to enter states of deep focus on a regular basis. It doesn't necessarily have to be every day. Some days you're gonna have, a full day of meetings and you don't do anything like that. But ultimately, if you're going to solve hard problems, you cannot have a podcast on in the background. You cannot be checking your phone intermittently. Even listening to music sometimes is maybe too much for me. Like, I can't write if I have music with lyrics in it. Like, I don't know, my brain doesn't work. So I think just having a recognition for the importance of being able to get into a focused state in a world that is fighting for your attention all the time is super valuable. And reading that early in my career allowed me to keep that in my mind and prioritize it over a very intense period of time when I was working at a Big Four accounting firm and studying for my CPA on the side. It's just, I think, a really important thing to recognize. All right, with those out of the way, I think we can get into some of the more interesting books that you probably haven't heard of, which I'm really excited to share with you. The first I have talked about a little bit on this channel before, but I read it this year. It's called The Ethics of Authenticity by Charles Taylor, and it is a philosophy book. It is about what it means to be authentic and to live an authentic life. And the reason why I would recommend it to myself in my 20s is because, again, your ambition and your frustration and the gap between those two can be easily hijacked in our modern culture to create a sort of toxic individualism, which is closer to an unhealthy obsession with yourself than it is about being authentic to who you are and the world around you. It's just about like self-improvement for the sake of self-improvement. And what Charles Taylor talks about in this book is that whether we like it or not, we all exist in this world which has context to it. All of the things that you think matter in the context of the culture that you're in. To give you a silly example that he talks about, when you try to describe yourself as a student, as a CPA, as an athlete, something like that, the words you choose to describe yourself, you are choosing because they have importance to our culture. You would never describe yourself as someone with 3,245 hairs on the top of your head, unless of course you lived in a culture where that number had significance due to religious reasons or something like that. So the idea is that we can't just define what is important ourselves. And as a society, we are increasingly losing touch with the things that previously brought meaning to us, whether that's religion, whether that's our communities, whether that's the family unit itself. All these things seem to be increasingly forgotten, and our culture seems to be pulling us away from these things towards whatever else. And for me, I just found the book really insightful to spend time thinking about what actually matters to me, what actually makes me happy in the long term, what are the things that I truly deeply believe are important, and not to run away from those, not to be pulled away from them by my ambition or by a desire to be seen in a certain way by other people or to live a more materialistic lifestyle. Hopefully that makes sense. I always find it a little bit difficult to articulate the book because it is a difficult topic, but I also think that's part of why Taylor does such a good job of doing it. He explains it in a way that really connected with me over several sections of the book itself. So give that a read if you're interested with that type of thing. Okay, another book I recommend on the topic of meaning is called Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. I actually don't remember why I originally picked up this book. I think I just saw it maybe on Goodreads or something, and I think the title just stood out to me and I wanted to give it a read. It's not a super long book. It's very easy to read. It's very well written. I remember really liking Lulu's writing style. And it is really about Lulu's journey of getting over her sense of nihilism and meaninglessness by realizing that we all matter because we matter to someone else. It's just a really good book, and that lesson has just stuck with me since I read it. And sometimes if I'm feeling melancholic or somewhat nihilistic, that comes back to me as something to think about, that I am lucky enough to have people in my life that care about me, and that means that I matter and I care about them, and that means that they matter. And extrapolating from that, I think there's a whole lot of other interesting things that you can get out of it in terms of your personal responsibility, trying to stay healthy as a responsibility to others because you matter to them. I think there's a lot to talk about and think about and unpack there once you read through her journey. So I highly recommend that book if you're interested in that one as well. Okay, so big pivot here, but a lot of Lulu's discussion in Why Fish Don't Exist is actually a historical narrative. And on the subject of history, I honestly think that studying history is one of the most important things that we can all do. There's so much repetition of human behavioral patterns across history, and we can learn so much about ourselves by studying the people of the past. My favorite history book that I've ever read is called The Great Game by Peter Hopkirk. It goes by two titles, The Struggle for Empire in Central Asia, as well as The Great Game on Secret Service in High Asia. I don't know why there's two names, but it's the same book. And the reason why I'm recommending it is honestly just because it's a sick book that I think most guys can get into. Like, it's about like these British and Russian spies that were sent into Central Asia to chart and map the territory and send back correspondence to their governments on what the other party was doing and the land that they were claiming. And it has all these letters of like the actual people that were doing the exploring and risking their lives going undercover into these high pressure environments where if their true identity was discovered, they would be killed on the spot. It's just a super fun book. And I read it in my 20s. I'm glad I read it, and I think everyone should read it because it's awesome. And then the last book just came out this year, so there's no way I could have read it earlier in my 20s. And I've also talked about it in another video on my channel, but it's called Breakneck by Dan Wang. And it is really just a discussion about the cultures of American and Chinese governments through the perspective of the training and background of who makes up the government. So he talks about how the American government is a lawyerly society. It is made up of people with a background in law. And what people with a background in law do is make laws and write policy. And that leads to a slow bureaucratic breakdown in how the government functions. On the other hand, the Chinese government is made up of engineers. And what engineers do is build things. And that allows the Chinese government to operate with a level of efficiency that we don't have in the West. However, at the same time, it also frequently leads to the destruction of cultural history, as well as the neglect of human rights and individual sovereignty. And this engineering versus lawyerly society framework really just connected a lot of the pieces for me in terms of understanding why each government behaves the way it does. And the relationship between America and China is obviously becoming more and more of the primary focus on a geopolitical level. And this has been the best book for me in terms of just understanding what's going on at a fundamental level, and being able to keep up with current events now through this perspective has changed a lot for me. I really recommend it in terms of just a foundation level set, because whether or not it's in your personal life or in your career, the relationship between the US and China will probably have some effect at some point. And being able to understand it in a simple way just makes navigating the challenges that come along with that a lot easier. So that's it. That is 9 books that I would recommend to myself to read in my 20s. Who knows, maybe in 10 years, I'll do another video of books that I recommend to myself in my 30s, but that's very far away and I would rather not think about it. So anyway, let me know what you thought. Have you read any of these books? Do you recommend them? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Did I miss something? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next week. See ya.